Yeah, it was Gunther who referred to Madison Grant and Lothrop Stoddard, the founding board member of Planned Parenthood, as the spiritual fathers of Nazi Germany. Where did Hitler get his eugenic ideas from?
1939, they set up 6 killing centers to kill people with disabilities.
His belief led directly to genocide and devastating war. Non-smoking, vegetarian, opposed to hunting, in favor of abortion and euthanasia. Also quoted by saying that Christianity is the heaviest blow that ever struck humanity. Are leftists worse than Hitler? Where did Hitler get his eugenic ideas from? Have you ever thought about that? What is the connection between Hitler and Darwin? Dr. Richard Weikart, incredible professor and author of From Darwin to Hitler, Evolutionary Ethics, Eugenics, and Racism in Germany, among many other brilliant books, joins me today. I wanted to have him on for a long time to discuss how vastly different the American public education system teaches the history of Hitler and Nazism. Newsflash, if Hitler was alive today, he would have identified with the blue-haired vegan lesbian leftist and not the conservative party. Did you know that? Fact check true. Check out Gruberware at SethGruber.com. Check out our fun, controversial pro-life merch if you like to be stared at in public. No, you're a clump of cells. Sassy since conception, former fetus, and more. Give the show a rating and review, Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Hit 5 stars. Tell me why you like the show, or any guests you recommend, or a comment you want to leave. Just hit 5 stars and you drive the show up the charts. It means so much to us. Join the White Rose Resistance at thewhiterose.life. If you want to give to a ministry that's combating evil ideologies, but we're not just ivory tower intellectuals, we actually mobilize the church through our resistance chapters around the country to shut down abortion mills, to crash drag queen story hours, to crash abortion fundraisers, to show the culture in the church how evil these ideas are and mobilize them to establish righteousness. Then go to thewhiterose.life or whiteroseaction.org. Let's get into it. This is the Seth Gruber Show. Dr. Weikart, welcome to the show, brother. Such a respecter of your work. This is probably the one that's like, if you ever get shot in the public square by some purple-haired lesbian dance professor, I imagine it would be for this book, From Darwin to Hitler. But thank you for joining the show today.
It's great being on, and people don't like that I drew those connections from Darwin to Hitler. In fact, a lot of people just got really ticked off at just the title. They didn't even read the book or bother to find out what I actually had to say in the book. But by the title, I got a lot of flack.
First published in 2004, and the title is From Darwin to Hitler, Evolutionary Ethics, Eugenics, and Racism in Germany, which is just brilliant. I mean, and so there's so much we could talk about. You've written multiple books, brother. A lot of it has been focused historically, if I'm correct, on the culture of death and sort of the ideologies that have allowed it to flourish in the first place. But tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got into studying these really nuanced and interesting connections, because you haven't been on the show before, so I want you to introduce yourself.
Right, yeah. Well, actually, in my early part of my career, I was very even while I was an undergraduate student, I was very heavily influenced by Francis Schaeffer and his work back in the 1970s and 80s. I was interested in his work on, whatever happened to the human race, for example, the work that he co-authored with Coop that dealt with abortion and then its repercussions and the value of human life and such. And so I was interested in the way that he sketched out this moral decline in Western civilization and such. And so when I went to graduate school, I was interested in exploring those kind of issues, moral decline and other kinds of things, and intellectual history and such that he had discussed in his works. And when I got to the University of Iowa, the professor I was wanting to study under, who had done a lot of writing about existentialism and other kinds of philosophies, he ended up going to the University of Virginia. And so he told me that, well, you probably ought to study under this other fellow here who's a historian of science. His name was Mitch Ash. And so I did. I studied under Mitch Ashton. I thought, well, if I'm studying under a historian of science, I need to pick something, in the history of science to deal with in terms of these things. And so I was interested in the history of Darwinism already to some degree. And I was looking at the history of Germany, in particular, German intellectual history. And so I decided to do my dissertation on the reception of Darwinism by the German socialists in the late 19th century. And so that's what I did. My dissertation was called Socialist Darwinism, Evolution in German Socialist Thought from Marx to Bernstein. And while I was doing that, I started finding out that there were a lot of Darwinists in the late 19th century who were promoting evolutionary ethics and trying to supplant Judeo-Christian ethics, as well as Kantian and other kinds of ethics as well, with evolutionary ethics. And so I thought, that would make an interesting project to work on in scholarship after I finished my dissertation. So I decided to go ahead and make my next project to be evolutionary ethics. And so that's the one that got tied into the From Darwin to Hitler. But when I first did that, I wasn't even thinking about Hitler. And I wasn't necessarily thinking about all of the connections with the devaluing of human life. The way that came about was really twofold. One was that I started discovering, as I started investigating evolutionary ethics, that a lot of the people in Germany who were pushing evolutionary ethics, especially by the 1890s and early 1900s, were also promoting eugenics. That is the idea we need to breed better humans, as well as sometimes even euthanasia and such like that. And some scientific racism was also tied very closely into all that. And so and then a second issue that happened during that time was in the mid-1990s, I read the book by the philosopher James Rachels called Created from Animals, The Moral Implications of Darwinism. James Rachels was a philosopher at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. He was a very close associate with Peter Singer, whom you probably heard of Singer's work. Singer was at Princeton later. But Rachels, in his book, claimed, his basic thesis of the book was, and he's a philosopher, not a historian, but as a philosopher, his basic thesis was that Darwinism undermined the Judeo-Christian sanctity of life ethic, which opened the doors for abortion, infanticide, euthanasia, and such. And he thought that was a good thing. He was arguing for that.
He was celebrating it. Okay.
Oh, yeah, exactly. He was saying that he believed in Darwinism, and he thought that Darwinism had undermined the Judeo-Christian sanctity of life ethic, and he thought that was a great thing. And so when I saw that, I thought, wow, that sounds fairly similar to what some of these Germans were writing that I've been reading about, especially Ernst Haeckel, who was the leading Darwinist in Germany in the late 19th century. I said, wow, that sounds very similar. I mean, Rachels didn't draw any of those connections. He wasn't a historian. He was a philosopher. But his ideas were very similar to ideas that I was looking at in the Darwinian context in the late 19th century. And so that's what got me interested in bringing in eugenics, euthanasia, and other kinds of things like that into my thoughts. So I thought about the devaluing of human life. And then the more and more I got in the project, I started thinking, well, eugenics, euthanasia, scientific racism was also tied in there very tightly. I thought, this does sound a lot like Nazism. And so I started investigating Hitler and looking at his lot. And indeed, I did draw the connection. And it seems pretty clear once you read carefully his works that Hitler believed in evolutionary ethics. He believed in a twofold way. One, he believed that ethics had evolved. That is, he thought that ethics were not something God-given or something like that. They're something that had just come about through evolutionary processes over, eons of time. And secondly, he thought that promoting human evolution, evolving humans to the next highest level or whatever, was the ethical thing to do. So whatever helps humans to evolve, that's good morally. That's what Hitler thought. And whatever, brings about biological degeneration, Hitler thought that was morally bad. So those are some of the ways I sort of got into this project of From Darwin to Hitler. And then from there, I just continued on those themes and continued looking at those particular issues over a lot of the rest of the scholarship that I was going to do over the course of my career.
I've tried a lot of coffee over the years. I think it's super American. We dumped all the tea into the ocean, so we got to drink coffee, guys, okay? And 7 Weeks Coffee is the one my wife and I landed on, and now it's the only coffee that we love to just chug like water. I mean, we have to have 7 Weeks Coffees at all of our events. It's not just great coffee. It's built around values we take seriously. 7 Weeks Coffee is America's only pro-life coffee company that's on a mission to fund the pro-life movement one cup of coffee at a time. It's incredible. Why are they called 7 Weeks Coffee, by the way? Because at 7 weeks, a baby is about the size of a coffee bean. And it's the same time that a heartbeat becomes clearly detectable via ultrasound. They built their business around saving lives by donating 10% of every sale to pregnancy centers and pro-life organizations nationwide. They've now raised over $1.8 million and saved thousands of lives. But let's talk about the coffee, because I care about what I'm fueling my body with, and it's mold-free, pesticide-free, shade-grown, and low-acid, and it's organically farmed. It truly checks all of the boxes. The Maha people are gonna love it. So go to 7weekscoffee.com, 7weekscoffee.com, and save 15% forever when you subscribe, plus get a free gift with your order. And exclusively for my listeners here at the Seth Gruber Show, use code RESISTANCE, okay? Resistance for an extra 10% off your first order. That's a 25% total savings on your first order, plus a free gift. Come on, just use the code RESISTANCE at checkout. Do the pro-life, pro-America thing, and go get 7 Weeks Coffee.
So, brother, the reason I got so interested in this topic, and why, frankly, it's kind of overdue to have this conversation with you, and I want people to make sure that they check out your writings, particularly this book, From Darwin to Hitler, is you may have been aware I did a film and a book a couple years ago called The 1916 Project.
Yes, I've seen it, yeah.
Yes, okay, excellent. And I had been doing speaking on this for a while before the film. And so I did a lot of that very nuanced rabbit hole kind of research, through the looking glass. You're like, whoa, how did I learn none of this in public school, or oftentimes even in homeschool curriculum? And so some of your resources were really valuable to make a lot more of those connections, but it always goes deeper, right? The connections always go deeper, and being able to understand how those ideologies have impacted each other and created really what I just want to call liberalism. Now, I know that there are exceptions. There are liberals who would reject Darwinism, or they would reject eugenics. But for the most part, the liberalism, radical individualism, the obsession with sexual liberation, a lot of these ideologies really do come from a lot of the same similar poisoned wells or streams, if you will. And so one of the shocking stories that you share about in this book that I thought might be a fun way to kind of kickstart a conversation about these ideas. This was not something I had heard of before you brought this up. You talk about Darwin's former mentor in natural science at the University of Cambridge. His name is Adam Sedgwick.
Sedgwick, yes.
Thank you, Adam Sedgwick, who you put here. This was fascinating, dude. This really changed so much of how I see a lot of these things. And so I just want to read it from your book. But this is a letter that Darwin's former mentor wrote to Charles Darwin in 1859 after reading, I guess, an early edition or right after Origin of Species came out. And he said, passages in your book greatly shocked my moral taste. He said, there is a moral or metaphysical part of nature as well as a physical. A man who denies this is deep in the mire of folly. 'Tis the crown and glory of organic sciences that it does through final cause link material to moral. You have ignored this link, and if I do not mistake your meaning, you have done your best in 1 or 2 pregnant cases to break it. Were it possible, which thank God it is not, to break it, humanity in my mind would suffer a damage that might brutalize it and sink the human race into a lower grade of degradation than any into which it has fallen since its written records tell us of its history. And so there's this interesting criticism here of Darwinism too, Dr. Weikart, that is this Gnostic kind of obsession, right? There's no connection between the metaphysical and the physical, or the material and the spiritual. Those are completely separate. There's no connection whatsoever. And here's Darwin's mentor saying, if it were possible to break this connection, which you seem to be attempting to do, we will descend into the lowest grades of degradation and chaos that human history knows of in all of the times that we've written of its history. I was like, that is such a shocking warning. for him to have received so early on. Anyways, I just wanted to open with that and get your thoughts because I thought that was interesting.
And that warning, interestingly, came about right after the publication of The Origin of Species, which doesn't even talk about humans in any extensive way. He just barely at the end of the book mentions humans as a possible. He says it'll throw light on human origins and stuff, but he doesn't really talk about humans in The Origin of Species. And the main reason for that was because he thought it was too controversial. But then 12 years later, in 1870, when he wrote Origin of Species in 1859, in 1871, 12 years later, he wrote Descent of Man, where he does take on the issue of morality. And Sedgwick would have been horrified by Descent of Man even more than The Origin of Species, because Darwin knew all along, even before Sedgwick told him this, Darwin knew that one of the biggest stumbling blocks to people accepting his theory was going to be human morality. And so throughout the course of keeping his notebooks, which he was doing in the 1830s and 1840s, he was keeping these notebooks where he's jotting down notes about all different scientific observations and such. He does write extensively in his notebooks about humans and human morality. And basically what happens is once he publishes Descent of Man, he argues that morality is simply social instincts that have evolved over time, and that other species have these social instincts, such as wolves or apes and such like that. Humans just have a little bit more of it than they have. And in fact, Darwin actually very specifically uses the terminology that humans are not qualitatively different from animals. They're only quantitatively different from animals.
Does he say that in Descent of Man or Origin?
In the Descent of Man, yes. In the Descent of Man. No, he doesn't say that in the Origin of Species.
Right.
He says that in the Descent of Man, that humans are not qualitatively distinct from animals. They're only quantitatively distinct. So we just have a little bit more moral sense, social instincts. We just have a little bit more aesthetic sense. We just have a little bit more rationality. But the animals all have those things too, he thinks. And that's one of what he was trying to do in the Descent of Man, show that humans are really not that much different from animals. And the other thing that was going to be important that Sedgwick also brings in there is that Darwin was essentially going to be denying that humans had any kind of soul or spirit that was distinct from the material realm. And there were quite a number of people, and in my research about the Germans, there were people like August Forel, who became a psychiatry professor at the University of Zurich, who said that when he read Darwin's work, The Origin of Species, basically he had something of a, you might call it a conversion experience, where he came to disbelieve in any kind of spirit or soul that humans had. So he thought that humans were not, different basically from other kinds of animals. And so because of this denying any kind of soul or spirit for humans, this then was going to strip another layer away from humans having any kind of value of human life. And Ernst Haeckel, who was the leading German Darwinist in the late 19th century and on the early 20th century, he was actually going to found an organization in the early 1900s called the Monist League. The Monist League was designed to undermine dualism, to promote monism. That is, that there's only one thing, there's material world's all there is, essentially, or that the material and spiritual world are sort of all the same thing, basically. So a monistic worldview as opposed to a dualistic worldview, which Christianity, of course, had been teaching. So in these ways, Darwinism was going to undermine the Christian sanctity of life ethic in a very powerful way in the late 19th century. And a lot of people were saying that again, a lot of Darwinists were saying that themselves. This isn't something that I'm just sort of coming in and saying, pushing this on them. A lot of Darwinists were saying, that Darwinism had undermined this notion of humans having a spirit or soul, that humans have any value of human life and such. And so they were saying, because of the Darwinian explanation, that human life has no meaning, has no value. Bertrand Russell, for example, is another great example of this. Bertrand Russell was one of the most influential philosophers of the early 20th century in Britain.
Right.
And he argued that human life was meaningless and had no value. And he said it's because we've evolved over eons of time and we've come about through these material processes that didn't have any vision of humans, didn't create it or anything like that. And so basically human life is meaningless and valueless. What's interesting is that Bertrand Russell, and I bring this out, I spend a number of pages in my book, Death of Humanity, talking about this issue. Bertrand Russell was not able to live consistently with that viewpoint because deep in his heart, he knew better. He knew that human life did have value. In fact, he actually got arrested and put in jail for campaigning against nuclear arms. Now, why was he campaigning against nuclear arms? Because he knew it was a bad idea for us to blow each other up, you know? So he knows that human life has some kind of value. There was a very interesting thing that I discovered, too, in the course of my research for the book, The Death of Humanity. And that is that Bertrand Russell wrote a letter. I think it actually was in 1916. Might go along with your 1916 project. But he wrote a letter to a lady that he was in love with at the time. And in his letter, he basically says that even though he doesn't believe in a God, that this notion that there is a God has sort of motivated everything that's good about him, he says. You know, he said it's just like it's like believing in a ghost, he said. You know, so intellectually he doesn't believe in it, but he recognizes somehow in his heart that yes, there is this God there, and that somehow that is what's helping provide any kind of moral goodness about him. So interesting, Bertrand Russell knew better. He knew that human's life had value, even though he was overtly denying. And the reason he's overtly denying it is because of his evolutionary view of the cosmos and of biological species.
First, we want to thank our longest sponsor of the Seth Gruber Show, Every Life Diaper Company. They're such incredible people. It's just amazing. I've known the founders since before the company existed. And so my wife and I can vouch for their integrity personally. They're the kind of people that we trust our house keys with, our wallets with. And Every Life is amazing because it's the only pro-life diaper company in America. But now they also have like lotions, baby shampoos, a femme care line. You know, if you like complain about our culture, if you don't like how you think like gay pride, like rainbow crap everywhere, like the wokeism and so many corporations and companies, oh, I used to love that brand, then stop shopping with that brand and find people that support your values and don't want to throw you in Bernie Sanders gulags. Okay, you go to everylife.com. You can get your diapers, your baby wipes, shampoos, lotions, all, and you can get, what's this, 10% off your first order, okay, by using promo code Seth10. Seth10. That's everylife.com, Seth10. And we've set up like the automatic subscription delivery. It just comes immediately. You never run out. It's quality. You don't have to make emergency runs to Walmart. And you know that you're putting your money where your mouth is, and you're defunding the woke corporatism by boycotting businesses that want to slaughter babies. How is it that almost every diaper company supports abortion? Irony is too strong a word. Go to everylife.com, promo code Seth10 for 10% off your first order, and let them know that we sent you. Well, yeah, that's classic, the fat kid who wants to have his cake and eat it too. You know, it reminds me of something Nietzsche said in The Will to Power. Dr. Weikart, he says another Christian concept has passed even more deeply into the tissue of modernity, the concept of the equality of souls before God. And then he says this concept furnishes the prototype of all theories of equal rights.
Yeah.
Nietzsche said that.
Yeah. And Nietzsche was influenced by the Darwinian project, even though he rejected some aspects of Darwinism. But interesting, this issue of equality, you're right, is extremely important because Darwinism was going to undermine the idea of human equality. If you look in Darwin's book, Origin of Species, the first two chapters, the first one is called Variation Under Domestication. The second chapter is Variation in Nature. And so you got these two chapters on variation, and the whole program is that everything's different. They're not equal. And interestingly, there's a historian who uses this Darwinian framework. His name is Noah Yuval Harari. He wrote a best-selling book about a dozen years ago or so called Sapiens, A History of Humankind. And in that book, he very specifically criticizes the Declaration of Independence. And here we are, going on to the 250th anniversary, of the Declaration of Independence. But Harari criticizes the Declaration of Independence for claiming that humans are created equal. He says, no, we're not created equal. We evolved differently. And so he specifically undermines this idea of equality. Then he also takes on the idea of human rights, too, by saying that the next phrase that says, and are endowed by their creator with inalienable rights, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He says there's no creator and there's no inalienable rights to humans either.
Wow.
And so he overtly denies any kind of right to life. And he claims it's all built upon this idea of biological evolution. We've evolved differently. We've evolved, randomly. And so there's no purpose or meaning, or there's no human rights. Just we can decide what we want about these things. So he's overtly denying any kind of right to life. And so these ideas have been very powerful over the years. And again, we can talk about the Nazi period, and I do bring a lot of connections with the Nazis, but I mean, a lot of these ideas are still percolating in Western culture and civilization and influencing, not in the same ways always as on the Nazi period. And, I'm not saying that these people that are promoting these are Nazis. They're not. But they're promoting some of the same ideas that Darwinism undermines the value of human life, and that therefore, it's legitimate to pursue abortion, infanticide, euthanasia, assisted suicide. Transhumanism is another thing that I discuss as well in my book, Death to Humanity, which is also built upon this Darwinian framework. And so these notions that the human life doesn't have any real value sort of flows out of the Darwinian worldview.
Guys, my book is officially out now, and I believe it's one of the most important books I've ever written. It's only the second book I've ever written, but I think it's my most important work. Psalm 88 speaks of a land of forgetfulness, a place where truth is forgotten, and so therefore righteousness can no longer endure. That's where we are today. We've made peace with our polished idols. We've called ancient evils by new names, dressed up in new garb. But it's all the same. In The Last Stand, I show how the early church fathers faced many of the same evils we face today. Child sacrifice, sexual revolution, gender confusion, moral chaos. And then the legacy of the church throughout the ages. They didn't compromise with darkness. They exposed it, confronted it, overcame it with truth. And this book isn't just a diagnosis complaining about what's broken. It's a recovery of the church's forgotten legacy of resistance and a blueprint for rebuilding what we've lost. If Western civilization is to endure, the church is going to have to remember who she is and take her stand once again. It's an incredible book. My brother Steve Day said, one of the finest contemporary treatises on Christianity and culture I've ever read. David Barton said, this book could not have arrived at a more critical hour. Should enough Christians read it with open eyes, the story of our age may yet be written as a rebirth rather than as a requiem. Go to thelaststand.film or thelaststand.com/book and pick up a few copies of my book, The Last Stand, Christ or Chaos, The War for the West, for your pastor, your friends, and your family members. Well, then, Dr. Weikart, I'll say it for you instead. I think that most libs are Nazis. They're socialists. Nazi stands for National Socialists. Mm-hmm. They're socialists. They universal health care and open borders and import the third world. So they'll vote for us because we know that when most immigrants get here for about 2 or 3 generations, they vote for the party that insisted that they should have citizenship here immediately or illegally and be able to vote whether they're citizens or not. So the entire Democrat Party is socialist today. Most of America has more socialism in it than our founders could have possibly ever imagined in their dizziest daydreams. And they believe there's an entire class of human beings that are not persons and can be slaughtered by the state in the name of freedom for others. I mean, of course liberals are worse than Nazis. They've slaughtered way more little babies in the wombs than Hitler ever slaughtered in the entire time he was German chancellor. So this was for my friends at Right Wing Watch, where I have an assigned W2 viewer of this show, Dr. Weikart. So there you go. I said it for you or for me. So yes, liberals by and large are worse than Nazis because most Nazis or members of the Nazi Party weren't actively killing those that the regime called Untermensch. Subhuman, a title that they got from Planned Parenthood's founding board member's book. But they believed in it and they supported it. That's what most libs do today. They want socialistic programs and they want to slaughter babies in the name of freedom for others. So I actually think that it makes them a lot worse than the Nazis. But
if you look at,
do you want to respond to that?
Well, if you look, the reason I said that I don't think they're Nazis is because one of the key and sort of central tenets of Nazism was the racism, and a lot of the people are pushing against racism in the liberal circles. But you're right.
Not if you're white.
But you're right that the numbers of people that have been killed under the regime have spiraled and skyrocketed way beyond what the Nazis could have imagined.
Right.
in part because they've had longer to do it, but also because there's just huge numbers happening. I once had someone challenge me. I was giving a talk at a university and had someone challenge me about the Nazis, it was involuntary, now it's voluntary. And my response to that was, well, their people are still dead. The people are still being killed.
Not for the baby.
So
it's not voluntary for the baby.
Yeah, exactly. It's not for them. And well, we were talking at that time about assisted suicide is what the issue that we were discussing at that particular time. So we were discussing assisted suicide. And I said, well, people are still dying. People are still being killed as a result of it. And, the issue of voluntary is there's lots of ways that's being bypassed too, by the way, with lots of pressure being put on people. In Canada, it's incredible. The amount of pressure people are being under
yes.
to
we've done whole episodes on that.
Euthanasia and such. It's just frightening. So, the numbers of people being killed.
Sometime I should have you back on just to talk about what's happening in Canada. But I like how John Stonestreet put this once, Dr. Weikart. He said, like the German extermination initiatives, these laws, referring to euthanasia and doctor-assisted suicide, these laws expand every time they are tried. The debate always begins with those near death. It quickly expands to those who are terminal, then to those with incurable disease, then to those with permanent conditions, then to the disabled, and finally to the depressed and mentally ill. First, consent is required, then it is implied, finally it is unnecessary. Guys, our culture is unraveling under the weight of the same ancient evils that threatened civilizations before us. Child sacrifice, sexual confusion, the rejection of God's design for humanity. It's not new, it's super ancient. And pastors, church leaders, faithful Christian warriors, the time for silence is over. But so many Christians have never been taught how the church confronted these challenges in the past with faithfulness for centuries. And that's why I want to invite you to host a screening of my film, The Last Stand. We're praying that this film will be for this generation what Schaeffer's How Should We Then Live was for the previous. A powerful film revealing how the early church fathers and the church throughout the ages fought the same battles we face today and how they transformed pagan cultures, not through compromise, but through courage, truth, and faithful resistance. And a screening is more than just a movie night, by the way. It's an opportunity to awaken your congregation, your family, equip your community, and start the conversations that matter most, okay? So if you're a pastor, if you're a ministry leader, if you're a Christian educator, you want to mobilize others to stand for truth in this generation, host a screening of my new film, The Last Stand. Go to thelaststand.film, thelaststand.film. Okay, it couldn't be easier. Press host a screening, schedule your screening. You can bring this for free to your church or your Christian school. The church changed the world once before. It's time to remember how.
Yeah, and if you look at the scholarship that sort of is supporting a lot of this, one of the key arguments that philosophers say is their strongest argument for physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia and such is the autonomy argument. But the autonomy argument actually implies that we should open it up to what anyone wants. Anyone can make their own choice for any reason. It wouldn't even have to be, any kind of physical condition or whatever. Just if I want to commit suicide, I can do it. And that's what actually autonomy implies if you push it to its limits. So most people are not willing to go that far to say that everyone should have complete autonomy. In fact, obviously, we have all sorts of laws that protect us from ourselves, not just assisted suicide, but with all sorts of other things, seatbelt laws and all sorts of other things.
Yeah.
So we don't have autonomy. But the philosophers who are pushing for it are claiming that we should have autonomy. And so they're pushing this kind of, and a lot of them are promoting kind of Nietzschean ideas of, that we can make our own morality, we should, and promote our own moral views. And so there's no real, good or evil. It's just whatever we decide, we want to do. This is the way that academia is going, especially. And so, society is sort of following behind in its train. We haven't got there as far as a lot of people in academia are pushing, but they're pushing in a very strong way for the devaluing of human life and for stripping all kinds of value of human life, that nothing really has any human value except what we decide we want to value.
Yeah, well, I mean, revolutions always end in blood, but they always start with ink. That's why C.S. Lewis said, the greatest blood shed will not be carried out by men with guns, but by men in suits sitting behind desks. And of course, these ideas have a lot of consequences. I want to talk more about this, Dr. Weikart. Let's talk more about how Hitler's a Darwinist. I find this funny because you know what the left does, right, Dr. Weikart? They're like, everything's Hitler, right? Like he's like worse than Satan, actually. It's worse to be compared. Think about this. It's worse to be compared to Hitler today in the 21st century than to the Lord of Flies, the father of lies, and Beelzebub. And so Hitler's become almost like this synonym for evil, bad thing I don't like, or evil incarnate on the left. And so it's like if Trump says, make America great again, then the liberal news is like, who else wanted to make their country great again? It's like Hitler. But I want to like flip that just for comedic purposes and then like get into the ideas with you. Well, it's like, who else was a Darwinian? It's Hitler. So it's like, that's an interesting indictment on the libs. Is they're teaching in our public schools required. So, the only book you can't teach in public schools, except in Texas, they just changed this a couple weeks ago. But the only book you can't teach in schools is the Bible. It's the only illegal book to teach in schools. But everything's there is Darwin. And so I just find this sort of interesting, especially with all the links to how this created not just Nazi Germany and various totalitarian regimes who had a sort of a eugenics, Übermensch, Untermensch worldview, but all of the chaos happening right now through the sexual revolution and the trans stuff and the killing of babies in America. So talk to us more about this Darwin-Hitler link.
Okay, yeah, and this is one thing that has created a little controversy among historians and such too, but it's because, again, people just don't like the link between, between Darwin and Hitler.
Right.
But if you do a careful examination, as I have done, of Hitler's writings, his speeches, his monologues, all sorts of other things like that, it becomes extremely clear that Hitler was embracing a Darwinian worldview. That is, and sometimes he actually describes it. He never uses the word Darwinian or Darwinist or anything, but he describes the Darwinian processes. So in his book, his second book, as well as in Mein Kampf, his second book, by the way, is just called Second Book because he never published it during his lifetime. They only found it after the Nazi regime was over. He'd written it in the late 1920s. But anyway, in his second book, he talks about how organisms multiply faster than their food supply. Because of that, they get involved in a competition between the species, and because of that struggle for existence, that then you have natural selection taking place, and the fittest survive, and so he describes the Darwinian process very carefully and very obviously, and then he claims that because races are unequal. And he, of course, thinks the Aryan race is superior and other races are inferior. Right. That therefore they're involved in this. They're in this struggle for existence, and he does use the word struggle for existence quite a lot. They're involved in a struggle for existence with these other races, and that this will eventually lead to higher evolution of the human species as they exterminate these so-called inferior species and stuff. So he lays out the framework, and he basically explains it very carefully, and anyone who reads it would get this as they read it. Now, interestingly, his associates also recognized this very, very obviously too. And let me just read to you just a real brief thing from his secretary, Ernst Traudl, Traudl Junge, I'm sorry, I got the name wrong. Traudl Junge, who after World War II talked about Hitler's views and what he was saying while he was in the bunkers and she was there, as working as a secretary. Here's what she said that Hitler said. This is a quotation of hers of Hitler's. Science is not yet clear about which branch humans originated from. We are obviously the highest stage of evolution of any mammal that evolved from the reptile to the mammal, perhaps through the apes, up to humans. We are a member of creation and children of nature, and the same laws are valid for us as they are for all living organisms. And in nature, the law of struggle reigns from the beginning. Everything that is incapable of life and everything weak is eradicated. Only humans, and especially the church, have made it their goal to artificially preserve the weak, the unfit for life, and the inferior.
Wow.
And so, again, she's claiming that he's making this case. And he's also arguing against the church. And he made a lot of anti-Christian statements in his monologues, too, that she talks about as well. And so Hitler was bashing the church for protecting people who are weak. And he used the word unfit.
Wow.
And the word unfit is because of this survival of the fittest was what Darwinism was about.
Yeah.
He's arguing that they're incompetent, and it's just the strong should prevail, basically. Hitler says the strong should prevail. We should just wipe out and destroy. He uses the word eradicate there of those that were weak. The weak should be eradicated. And so this is what he saw his program about. So when Hitler was doing some of the main policies that he was carrying out, such as killing people with disabilities, killing people of other races, which included the Jews, but also included other races as well. It included the Gypsies. It included the Slavs. It included many other peoples as well. When he was carrying out his warfare, he was trying to gain what was called living space. That was the German word Lebensraum, which had been actually coined by a Darwinian biologist who had become a geographer. His name was Friedrich Ratzel. Ratzel had coined the term Lebensraum because he said, what the Darwinian struggle for existence is all about, Ratzel said, is gaining living space so that you can propagate the species and get rid of the people that were on that living space and supplant them. And so Hitler, when he launched his wars of aggression against Poland, Czechoslovakia, the Soviet Union, he thought he was gaining living space, and then ultimately France, Denmark, Norway. He was trying to gain living space so that he could win the Darwinian struggle for existence and spread the Aryan race out into those places and push the other peoples out one way or the other, either by killing them or by forced immigration or whatever he was trying to do to get rid of them. So this was all part of a Darwinian program. It was all part of trying to win the struggle for existence against other peoples. And so these are some of the pivotal policies, of course, in his regime. The euthanasia program, the warfare, the killing of people of other races, especially Jews, but others as well. These were all sort of pivotal parts of his program, and they were all driven by a Darwinian mentality.
Yeah. Well, Hitler is also quoted by saying that Christianity is the heaviest blow that ever struck humanity. In SS Magazine in 1939, said, harping on and on that God died on the cross out of pity for the weak, the sick, and the sinners. They then demand that the genetically diseased be kept alive in the name of a doctrine of pity that goes against nature and of a misconceived notion of humanity. But I've been reliably informed by the Legacy News media, Dr. Weikart, that the problem with Hitler, if you're really smart, is that he went too far right. They were too conservative. And they just wanted to make Germany great again, which is obviously why he tried to take over all of Europe and called himself a National Socialist. So, I mean, the revisionist history here I just find is really interesting and funny. His secretary Traudl, right? You know why only reason I know
Traudl
about
Junge. Her last name was Junge.
Traudl Junge, yeah. The only thing I know about her from my own research, which is a cool connection, is she spoke in those interviews later on in her life that she had heard about this young woman named Sophie Scholl, who was murdered for resisting the Nazis. And she said, thinking upon it later, she realized that Sophie Scholl was murdered at the same age that Traudl was when she entered the regime to work for Hitler. And so she famously said, youth is no excuse. And if I had really wanted to know the truth, I could have found it out. So it's kind of an interesting story there. But one of the interesting links here, and I wonder if you have anything to add to this, is the people that influenced Hitler. Right? This guy was in jail right after his failed coup attempt in Munich, and he's reading broadly during that time. One of the authors is Madison Grant, who published a book in 1916 called The Passing of the Great Race. And he was the founder and president of the American Eugenics Society. And he shared office spaces with a young woman who was just starting an organization by the name of Margaret Sanger. But can you speak to a little bit more of this and just debunk this ridiculous claim that, the problem with Hitler is he wanted to make Germany great again and he was just too conservative?
Yeah, and it wasn't just Madison Grant's work. There was a publisher in Munich named Julius Friedrich Lehmann, And Lehman published scientific textbooks mostly, but he also began specializing, especially by the late 19-teens and 1920s, in books on eugenics, scientific racism, and issues like that. And he's actually the one that published Madison Grant's.
Interesting.
The German translation of Madison Grant. And Julius F. Lehmann was a friend of Hitler's. He was in Munich. He knew Hitler, and he basically gave Hitler all of the books that he published about eugenics and things. And so he would have given Hitler Madison Grant's book, as well as many others. And one of the books, very interestingly, that he published that may have even been more influential on Hitler, it looks like, was a book by 3 Germans named Erwin Bauer, Fritz Lenz, and Eugen Fischer. And this Bauer-Fischer-Lenz book was a 2-volume book called, I think its translation, it was called Human Heredity.
Yes.
It was translated into English. It was used widely in German universities for courses on human heredity. It was used in American universities and British universities, in fact, in its English translation as well. It was very influential in the academic community. It pushed eugenics very strongly, also scientific racism, and also had anti-Semitic passages as well, especially Fritz Lenz wrote actually over half of it. And Fritz Lenz was the first eugenics professor in Germany. In 1923, he was appointed professor of eugenics. It actually was called racial hygiene in Germany, Rassenhygiene.
Yes.
He was the first professor of racial hygiene in Germany. He was at the University of Munich in 1923.
That's right.
And then Eugen Fischer, this is before Hitler came to power. I mean, this is way before Hitler came to power. This is, 10 years before. And they published their book well before Hitler came to power as well. And Hitler was very influential. Hitler probably read this while he was in prison. There's evidence that he did do that he did read that. Whether he read the whole thing or not, who knows? But he probably read at least parts of it. In any case, Fritz Lenz later was going to, when the Nazis came to power in 1933, Fritz Lenz wrote an essay. It actually was an essay he'd written earlier, but he wrote a little preface to his essay saying, sort of gloating about how the Nazis had built upon his ideas about ethics and evolution and other kinds of things like that. And he was sort of claiming that this was a key way that Hitler had been influenced. So this Bauer-Fischer-Lenz book was going to be very heavily influential on Hitler, as well as on many other people in the sciences. Eugen Fischer was an anthropologist, interestingly. He was one of the leading anthropologists in Germany. He was at the University of Freiburg in the early part of the 20th century. But in 1927, this is 6 years before the Nazis came to power, so they didn't have anything to do with this. He was appointed the head of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Human Heredity, Eugenics, and what was the other one? Is the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Eugenics, and Human Heredity. That's what it was.
That's it, yeah.
And so that was in Berlin, and that was considered one of the most prestigious positions. I mean, not like getting a Harvard professorship or a Yale professorship.
Funded by the Rockefellers, by the way.
But interestingly, one of the reasons the Rockefellers were funding these kinds of things is because the Germans were so advanced in their promoting of eugenics at the time. But yes, you're right. The Americans were funneling money into Germany to help promote these ideas as well. But the Germans had a very vigorous eugenics program even before, sometimes even preceding the Americans to some degree. A lot of people think, like Edwin Black in his book War Against the Weak, has this idea that Americans influenced the Nazi eugenics program. Well, to some degree, there's some truth to that. I mean, there were American eugenists, like you point out, Madison Grant and others, who were influential. And certainly the laws that were passed in the United States, in Indiana in 1907, the first compulsory sterilization law, certainly those were things that influenced the German scene to some degree. But the Germans actually had the first eugenics organization in the world in the early 20th century under Alfred Ploetz. They had the first eugenics journal in the world under Alfred Ploetz also. So they had a very vigorous eugenics movement in Germany that probably influenced the American eugenics movement as much as vice versa. So there was a lot of crossover between the two. They were both influencing each other. And so Hitler was influenced by a lot of these German sources, but also by the Americans as well. Again, and Julius Friedrich Lehmann, who I mentioned earlier, is this publisher. He also began right after World War I, or maybe it was even right toward the end of World War I, he began publishing a journal called Deutschlands Erneuerung, which means Germany's renewal. And that journal would have influenced Hitler fairly heavily too, because again, Lehman knew Hitler. I'm sure he was funneling his journal. In fact, Hitler actually published an article in that journal later on, and some of his associates published articles in that journal as well too. But most of the articles were about eugenics and scientific racism and things like that.
Right.
Some of them were translated from English, so there were some. I think Lothrop Stoddard might have had an article in there, if I recall correctly. But there were Americans that had articles in there, but most of them were by German. Max von Gruber was a prominent hygiene professor at the University of Munich. He had
Gruber.
articles in the, yes, Gruber, von Gruber, sorry about that. Sorry, Seth. He was a prominent hygiene professor who was promoting eugenics in the early 20th century. He had articles in there, and there were others as well. So Hitler was influenced by a whole wide variety of thinkers, both Germans, also some Americans, and such. And of course, obviously, Galton, the founding father of eugenics, is sort of behind all of this in certain ways too,
Right.
even though he's not still alive during most of this time when Hitler is being influenced. And there's no evidence that Hitler read Galton's work directly, but he was influenced by a lot of other eugenics people who were influenced by Galton.
Yeah, well, Hans F. Gunther, who received an award from Hans F. H. Gunther. Anyways,
FK, I think it's FK, I think.
Yes, thank you. He received an award from Hitler. I forget the name of the award, but for some of his writings, Hitler read Gunther, and it was Gunther who referred to Madison Grant, the founder of the American Eugenics Society, who had once put a black man in a cage with a monkey at the New York City Bronx Zoo.
Right, Oda
but it was
Benga,
Gunther. Yeah, it was Gunther who referred to Madison Grant and Lothrop Stoddard, the founding board member of Planned Parenthood, as the spiritual fathers of Nazi Germany.
And Gunther himself was a spiritual father of Nazi Germany too, because Gunther published some works in the 1920s that were also published by Lehman, whom I just mentioned to you before. Lehman also published Gunther's works. Gunther published books about the very strongly racist, also pushing eugenics, although he was more interested in racism. And interestingly, once the Nazis came to power in Thuringia, one of the German states, in 1930, the Nazis sort of formed a coalition cabinet in Thuringia in 1930. One of the first things they did was to get Gunther a professorship at the University of Jena, which was in Thuringia. And so Gunther got brought on, and Hitler actually attended his a lecture where he gave his inaugural lecture for Gunther at the University of Jena. And then later they were going to promote Gunther to the University of Berlin during the Nazi period as well. And so, Gunther was a very key figure in formulating a lot of the Nazi ideas. He also was embracing social Darwinism and saw racism, the inequality of races having come about through evolutionary processes and such. And I do detail Gunther's influence on Hitler as well in my writings.
Dr. Weikart, all this history, I find it so interesting just because most people do function off of worldviews. Like most people are making decisions based off of deeply held beliefs, but most people can't name those beliefs. Like a lot of people in America today make decisions based off of ideas about radical individualism, liberalism, the idea that there's no God. And those infuse our moral thinking and inform our decisions, whether we can name the ideologies we've adopted or not. But then there are others who explicitly understand the power of ideas and rejoice to carry those ideas to horrific conclusions. And a lot of this does seem to do with Darwin. Can you just keep unpacking more of this? Because this has really been your academic expertise.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you come across people who are willing to sort of radically and fanatically apply the ideas of Darwin to their worldview, and to take these to the nth degree. I mean, like Hitler did, for example. Everyone may not apply them in the same ways, but they'll do them in some pretty horrific, and sometimes they do them in very similar and same ways. In my book, Darwinian Racism, I talk about the Columbine school massacre that took place in 1999. And it's really amazing if you look at the ideas that Eric Harris was was circulating in his mind before this took place, and he did keep a journal, so we have evidence for what he was thinking and what he was reading and what he was and different things that he was thinking about. He talks about how human life basically has no value. He talks about the impact of Darwinism, Nietzscheanism, other kinds of things like that. But interestingly, on the day that he began shooting up Columbine High School, it was April 20th, 1999. Now, that might not mean anything to a lot of your listeners, but April 20th is Hitler's birthday. And he did that purposefully to try to honor Hitler, and on Hitler's birthday to do the Columbine massacre. Not only that, but while he was carrying out this massacre, he was wearing a T-shirt that said natural selection. And so there's a Darwinian connection. They're very overtly there too, that he was wanting to be there on the day, Hitler's birthday, that he's carrying out this massacre of people at Columbine High School. And this is not the only case, by the way, of mass murders that have been carried out by people in the name of Darwinism in the United States. There was, in the Gilroy Garlic Festival in 2017, there was a guy who shot up a bunch of people. And then he told people that they should, just before he did it, he had posted something, I think it was on Instagram or some social media site anyway. He posted a thing telling people to read this book that was a book about social Darwinism and how Darwinism had undermined the sanctity of life and such. And then there was, in addition to this guy, there was another guy in Finland in the early 20th century who did a school shooting, and he had a nickname of Natural Selector. It was one of his online nicknames and such. He was promoting eugenics and different. His name was Eric Pekka Anyway, he was Pekka Ovinen, rather. Eric Pekka Ovinen. And he shot up his high school and was doing it in the name of Darwinism as well. So we have cases, and if you do research about the white nationalists today, there are many white nationalists who are very big on Darwin and his theory as well. And I have a whole chapter on that, in fact, in my book, Darwinian Racism, where I discuss that. So these ideas, hopefully it stays in a fringe group, but again, in the wider culture, it happens more on the liberal side. I think you're right there. That in the wider culture, these ideas permeate the more liberal side of the spectrum, where then we get the slaughters of people with abortion and infanticide and euthanasia and assisted suicide. And again, academics are promoting these kind of ideas. Peter Singer, who was a prominent professor at Princeton University, professor of human values. He had an endowed chair in human values. That was the title of his chair. But he didn't believe in human value. In fact, that's what I actually debated him for a half hour on a radio show called Unbelievable. You can actually still look at this online. Go to the Unbelievable website. When I debated Peter Singer, our debate was about, does human life have intrinsic value? And Singer argued, no, it doesn't have intrinsic value. And I argued, yes. And in the course of our conversation, one of the more interesting things that took place was I tried to press him about what is it that he thinks that gives some human lives value? Because he thinks there are what he calls persons. His theory is called personhood theory. So he thinks there's some humans are persons and do have value, but not everyone. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of pressed him on this point because it is really arbitrary. And I tried to point this out to him. He didn't quite buy it, but still he wasn't able to give a coherent answer, in my view, because I said, well, look, there's this other bioethicist named Joseph Fletcher, who was one of the leading bioethicists in the 1950s and 1960s, who was promoting this personhood theory before Singer was around. Right. And Fletcher said that there were 15 different characteristics that give humans value. And so he has this list of these 15 different characteristics. Now, Singer usually focuses on two key characteristics, consciousness and ability to plan the future. Those are the two big ones that Singer sort of focuses on mostly. And so I said, well, how do we know, that Fletcher's 15 things aren't right? And, so how do we decide? And basically, he could not give me an answer, even though this is the crux of his argument as to what gives human life value. He could not give me an answer. He said, well, we could debate, which characteristics, can give human life value. But he
Nice.
never gave me a clear answer as to why those particular ones that he has chosen give human value. I think it's because he's a professor. And so consciousness, he thinks he's got consciousness. And so the ability to plan the future. So it's mental things about him. So, so he thinks that that's what gives human life value.
Take an incredible level of arrogance, Dr. Weikart. Talk about like being willing to blithely toss human lives like dice. To be like, I know we're discussing who gets to live and who gets to die, and the qualities and accidental properties that one must possess before you have a right to live. But I can't really tell you how many or which ones they are. I mean, that is an incredible level of arrogance.
Sure. And Singer has actually waffled on this issue over how to try to determine, when a person has enough qualities of these qualities of consciousness. So, for example, with infanticide, Singer has very clearly promoted infanticide.
Yeah.
But his present position, at least when I debated him back in 2017, I think it was, somewhere around there anyway. When I debated Singer, his position at that time, and as far as I know still is that he didn't really know when to draw the line as to when an infant had value in its human life. Earlier in his career, he'd said the first 30 days, but it's all arbitrary. How much consciousness do you have to have? How much ability to plan the future do you have to have? It's all arbitrary when you really get down to it. So he really doesn't have an answer as to when these people have. Same thing on the opposite side. How much, when a person has dementia or something like that. When does that person have enough consciousness to still be considered a person? When don't they? He really doesn't have a way to argue that. And it's the same thing, by the way, with people that are arguing for assisted suicide and euthanasia in the United States and Canada and European countries, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg all have it, as well as a number of other ones now too, Spain and Germany and Austria. But it's all arbitrary. When does human life actually have value? They don't have a real key cutoff point like we do. I mean, we have a very obvious point: conception and natural death. Those are the obvious cutoff points where human life, where a person is a human and where they have life.
Right.
But they're wanting to say, because they say, oh no, they have to have these other characteristics. Well, how much of those characteristics? When? How much?
Yeah.
They don't really have an answer for that, and so it's all arbitrary.
Isn't that interesting?
So they end up defining however they want to, essentially.
Right. I mean, I call these people learned ignoramuses, Dr. Weikart. There really is a fascinating level of stupidity to the highly educated liberal mindset. Like Peter Singer has a very high IQ. I'm sure so did Darwin. Like, these people are quite smart and yet at the same time stupid. It's such an interesting thing. Like, what did Chesterton say? If Darwinism was the doctrine of the survival of the fittest, then eugenics was the doctrine of the survival of the nastiest. It's like, right, because who's left alive behind these aims, these movements, these ideologies? Some of the nastiest, evil, most dangerous people you could think of, who are willing to obliterate and murder millions of people in the name of progress. We do that today with abortion. Every totalitarian atheistic regime of the 20th century was fundamentally Darwinian in nature. It's such an interesting, I guess, observation of liberalism, is that they're simultaneously warning that Trump is going to be the next totalitarian dictator, simultaneously screaming about the horrors of totalitarianism. That's why they love people like Hannah Arendt, right, who wrote on the origins of totalitarianism. It's why they love to talk about, Bonhoeffer or Solzhenitsyn, or people who were speaking out and resisting these totalitarian ideologies and regimes, and yet at the same time force public school teachers to teach Darwin in school. And that's it. Yeah. It's a weird thing, man.
Yeah. And, it's interesting that I think this illustrates, what Paul wrote in Romans 1 when he said that the reason that these people are going this direction is because they do not want to retain God in their thoughts. And so I had an interesting conversation once with a very prominent philosophy professor who wrote a lot about Darwinism and the philosophy of Darwinism and such. And the conference we were at Oxford University was about evolutionary ethics. And I was able to sit down and have breakfast with him one time. And I asked him, why do you take this position, that you do about God and such? And he had been actually raised in a Christian family. And what he told me was that when he was growing up, he said he said, God and I really didn't get along, he said, as a young person. He said, one of the comments that he made to me was, I don't want anyone telling me what to do in this life, and I sure don't want anyone telling me what to do in the next one. And so he has this very anti-authority, anti-God, anti-authority kind of position that's driving, him to take these kind of positions, promoting Darwinism, promoting evolutionary ethics and such. And, because he doesn't want there to be any authority over him. And so that's what's sort of motivating him. And different, it runs itself slightly different in different permutations. I mean, Darwin himself was trying to reject the idea that there's any kind of God. He started off sort of being a theistic evolutionist of sorts in his very early phases, but then he became an agnostic by later in his career. But basically, he was trying to find an explanation without God. And so that's really a lot of what they're trying to do. And a lot of people in the intelligent design movement, which I've been very connected with over time. I just got back, in fact, from an intelligent design conference in Colorado Springs. But the intelligent design people have been promoting this idea. And a lot of people, they just don't want, they basically say, we'll accept any explanation except one that includes God. Wow. Except one where God has some role in it. And so once you do that, then Darwinism is basically the only show in town, or some kind of evolutionary explanation is the only show in town. It has to be by chance events because we don't want there to be any God involved or anything like that. And once you do that, then you open the door to, okay, we as humans are just the product of mindless processes that have happened over eons too. So human life doesn't have any real value either. There's no meaning or purpose in the universe. And so they sort of run down that stream. So once you buy into certain wrong ideas, especially if you try to take them seriously and try to apply them in a really consistent way, you do end up in some pretty frightening territory. Where if human life has no value or meaning or anything, then basically, you can go along with Nietzsche's ideas that, the Übermensch, the Overman or Superman, basically gets to call all the shots, oppress everyone, destroy everyone, do whatever he wants to anyone else, because he's the Übermensch. And he gets to decide what's good and evil. There's no one else to make those kind of decisions.
Have you debated a lot of philosophers on the left besides Singer?
No, not a lot of them, no.
Have you ever asked any of them kind of like why they even trust their own arguments? Like, I've always wondered that, like Chesterton said, like, reason is itself a matter of faith, so if in the Darwinian worldview, we came from electrified sludge, that coincidentally arranged itself into consciousness, what are the chances, or evolved from like apes, then and all that we can know is what can be tested by the senses. So that there's no talk about metaphysical truths or like the permanent things. And so then thinking is a result of neurons firing in the brain, which is outside your control in the first place, which didn't come from a creator because you came from electrified sludge. Then why should you trust your own thinking? And if you can't trust your own thinking, we surely shouldn't trust the arguments for atheism or Darwinism in the first place. I haven't debated a lefty professor in some time. I did at like 26, 25 years old at UC San Marcos. But I've always wanted to ask like one of the lib academics that question. Have you ever asked them that?
No, I haven't. Interestingly, Darwin actually makes a comment, though. I don't remember if it's in The Descent of Man or if it's in his autobiography. I think it's in his autobiography. But Darwin makes a comment at one point about how can we trust our own minds since we're just evolved.
Yes.
So he actually does ask that question that you're actually bringing up here. But then basically he just sort of ignores it, the rest of the at the time, but he does ask that question and such. And so I think that idea and concept is sort of percolating out there in the background, but people just don't want to deal with it. They don't want to touch that because, I think it does expose the nonsense behind what they're promoting. But you're right. I mean, why would we accept the concepts and if all of our ideas and concepts are simply a product of material causation, then that's true of everyone, and no one's ideas have any merit really. They've just been produced by material causation. So how can we trust them? It's a great question, and I hope you'll be able to press people on that.
Yeah. I mean, I love one of our mutual friends, Dr. Nancy Piercy, who is in both of my films, The 1916 Project and The Last Stand, which just came out. And of course, she studied under Schaeffer at L'Abri as well. But she made this point, beautifully as well. I mean, materialists say that human thought is a product of neurons firing in the brain, except for their own theory.
That seems to be the way it works with ethics too, by the way. They'll say ethics are simply things that and this particular philosophy professor I was mentioning to you earlier that I talked to at Oxford, he also believed in evolutionary ethics, that ethics are just something that evolved, but somehow he thinks his ethics have some kind of merit or something. I don't know. And I don't know where they get that merit from. I mean, how is his, and I have actually pressed people on this point, not any big name people or anything like that, but I have pressed some students and different people I've talked to at various times about this issue and said, well, what is it that gives your ethics superiority to Hitler's ethics? And interestingly, I once was talking to I was at a conference on evolutionary ethics in 1909, which was the 150th anniversary of the Origin of Species, 200th anniversary of Darwin's birthday. And so they're having this conference on evolutionary ethics at San Diego State University.
Not 1909. You weren't alive then.
Excuse me, I meant 2009.
Yeah, 2009.
Sorry. I was alive in the 1900s, but not 1909. You're right, 2009. I'm sorry. So anyway, I talked to this one graduate student, a philosophy graduate student, and I asked him. He said he believed in evolutionary ethics. I said, well, what about Hitler then? Was he evil? And this guy basically sort of hemmed and hawed a little bit and then said, well, Hitler was neither good nor evil. I said, oh. He said, I don't like Hitler, he said, but there is nothing to say that he was either good or evil. And really, that's what it comes down to when you get to the...
Doesn't it?
That's really, if they're going to be consistent with their own ideology, Hitler was neither good nor bad.
It's just the will to power.
It's just the way it is, just the way the world was. And he was just programmed by the material causation to be what he was, and so are we.
Evolutionary psychologists insist that our ideas have been selected not for their truth value, but for their survival value. Except for their ideas. And so again, it's very interesting to me. I want to point people to your book, From Darwin to Hitler, Evolutionary Ethics, Eugenics, and Racism in Germany. Darwinian Racism is another book you have. Before we finish, Dr. Weikart, I want to get your thoughts on this. This is something I wanted to ask you. This is a biography on Hitler. It's very short. It's just called Hitler by A.N. Wilson. And when he published this, he stepped in horse manure. He was ripped apart by the liberal establishment. And a lot of it had to do with how he closes out the book. And there's a short section here I wanted to read to you and get your thoughts on this. He said, Hitler's crude belief in science fed his unhesitating belief in modernity. He abolished the old black letter Gothic typeface in which Germans had been producing books since they invented printing and replaced it with a typeface in conformity with the rest of the Western world. He liked the idea of every family possessing a car. He built a system of motorways all over Germany. The mechanized age was one which he assumed to be good. In this respect, Hitler was like almost every politician of influence since. When Tony Blair became Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, he called for every child in every British primary school to be given a laptop computer. He was echoing almost exactly Hitler's view. I find it a real absurdity that even today a typewriter costs several hundred marks. One can't imagine the time wasted daily in deciphering everybody's scribbles. Why not give lessons in typewriting at primary school instead of religious instruction, for example? Hitler's zest for the modern His belief that humanity would become more reasonable when it had cast off the old shackles of the past, old-time handwriting, religion, and so forth, and embraced science and modern roads, was a belief shared with almost all forward-thinking people at the time, and it continues to be the underlying belief system of the liberal intelligentsia who control the West. His belief led directly to genocide and devastating war. At the same time, he believed himself to be enlightened and forward-looking, non-smoking, vegetarian, opposed to hunting, in favor of abortion and euthanasia. Have we asked ourselves the right question about Hitler's normal and ordinary beliefs? By eliminating some of his more grotesque prejudices from our moral vocabulary, have we really cast off his legacy? Do not politicians in today's Western world, when they wish to impose their values on some other nation or group of people, still feel themselves entitled to employ war as the ultimate weapon? Far from casting off Hitler's legacy, many of the world's politicians, and especially those who consider themselves most enlightened, are in fact his heirs. For that reason, we will perhaps always be compelled to think about his life and the chilling fact that in all his world outlooks and his views, Hitler was an embodiment, albeit an exaggerated embodiment, of the beliefs of the average modern person. Okay, he goes on, but anyways, like, he's kind of saying, like, today's libs have more in common with Hitler than they think.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, Hitler did see himself as a progressive. He didn't use that word, but he saw himself as a revolutionary. He saw himself as overthrowing the powers that be. He didn't see himself as, carrying on the traditions of the German people. He did try to mask some of that. That's to be sure. And a lot of Germans didn't understand all of what he was promoting at the time. I mean, for example, the euthanasia program was not popular in Germany. It's fact that's why when the Nazis set up their original euthanasia program, was codenamed T4 program,
right,
in 1939, they set up 6 killing centers to kill people with disabilities. And by mid-1941, they had to close down those centers because there was popular opposition to it from the German people. Now, the Nazis didn't stop the killing, though. They just did it in a more decentralized way, so it wasn't quite as obvious to the public and such. So not everything that Hitler did was being promoted by all of the German people, but so they had to hide some of their ideas. But the ideas that they were hiding were generally ideas that were considered scientific, progressive. You look at who was promoting eugenics, in the early 20th century, it was the progressives, and who the Germans were giving awards to, like Americans, they were giving awards to and stuff. There's a lot of people, they would consider themselves progressives, people that they thought were on the forefront of,
right.
And Hitler thought he was promoting progress. So yeah, I mean, I think that does capture a lot of what's going on. And again, the big issue that I sort of hammer away at is this issue that I think that the liberals very often share with the Nazis, is this devaluing of human life, which is just has created atrocities both in the Nazi period and in modern America.
Yeah, and they tell us, Dr. Weikart, that it's Christian nationalism that's the great threat to freedom and democracy. Something tells me it's secular globalism, actually, and secular humanism, which took more innocent lives in the 20th century alone than all of the so-called religious wars combined, which is interesting.
Oh yeah, it's the left that has had far more, even if you put Hitler on the right, which I don't think is quite accurate, even so, the left has still committed far more atrocities. If you look at the Soviet Union, China, Southeast Asia, and many others as well during that time. And it's just frightful. But again, turning in the United States, I mean, we see also too with the abortion regime that's just killed tens of millions, far beyond what Hitler could have even imagined then.
Yeah. I just find all the Nazi Hitler stuff so hilarious. We're just like like most people just are such stupid students of history. Like Hitler would have felt most at home. Like that guy would have shopped at Whole Foods every day. Like Hitler would have been most at home with like the fat lesbian single cat ladies. Like those are his people. More soy, more veganism, more pets. Let's slaughter all the children. Welcome to Whole Foods. Welcome to Amazon. Okay. And we have completely allowed the public education sector to completely rewrite history in this sense. Like I have a first, I think it's a first edition. I have the German translated first edition of Lothrop Stoddard's The Revolt Against Civilization, The Menace of the Underman. And the Third Reich the German government paid to have the founding board member of Planned Parenthood, Lothrop Stoddard's book, translated into German, where it was assigned in German schools, Dr. Weikart. He was invited to the Third Reich. He did like a journalistic interview tour. He is the only American to have a one-on-one meeting with Adolf Hitler in a closed private room, one-to-one, after he rose to power. He sat on a German eugenics court and helped them reach a positive verdict in sterilizing certain Jews. He writes about it in his book When He Gets Home. And it's after that point that we begin to see widespread use of the term Untermensch, which was the title of Heinrich Himmler's famous Nazi propaganda book. And that was how they translated the word underman from Margaret Sanger's Bestie's book, was underman, Untermensch, subhuman. And anyways, this is why I think your work is so stellar and important. Where would you point people to get your books, to read more? Do you have any interesting closing comments that the layperson should know about this whole conversation?
Yeah, they can get my books on Amazon or other booksellers, or get them used on the internet too, in different ways. Darwinian Racism is actually my more recent book, and is a little less expensive too. So they might want to try that one rather than From Darwin to Hitler, which is fairly expensive. But is pretty powerful too. Darwinian Racism actually looks more at the Nazi connections more directly too. From Darwin to Hitler looks mostly at the pre-World War I period. So it gives you more of the background and does a good job of that. But Darwinian Racism actually does look more at the Nazis. And I have a chapter in the Darwinian Racism on Darwin's own views about racism, which is an interesting theme in and of itself. And then the last chapter is on white nationalism in the United States too. So readers might be a little more interested in the Darwinian Racism book, but From Darwin to Hitler also good. And my book, Death of Humanity, for those that are interested in the abortion, infanticide, euthanasia angle. My book, Death of Humanity, covers not just Darwin's influence on it, but also Nietzsche and evolutionary psychology, behavior psychology. I cover a lot of other issues too, and how they contributed to the devaluing of human life in Western society. Yeah,
they're such stellar works. I want people to check them out. If you guys have ever had a sense that these ideas just seem to be asinine, you are correct. But that doesn't mean they're not dangerous. Which is why Dr. Weikart's work is so important. It reminds me of something Chesterton said about the eugenicists of his day. Dr. Weikart, he said they combine a hardening of the heart with the sympathetic softening of the head. And so, in other words, they're stupid. But hard-hearted people are dangerous people. And there is a warning from a lot of the study of the history of these ideas of how those revolutionaries, those tearing down, will go to incredible lengths to apply those dangerous ideas in very heinous ways. And I think that's why your work is so important and why people need to read it, especially as we see what's happening with the culture of death across the West, and specifically in some European countries, including Canada, where these ideas are being taken to horrific ends, where now, was it the second or third leading cause of death in Canada is doctor-assisted suicide. It's absolutely horrific. We'll have to have you back on just to talk about that. But Dr. Weikart, thank you for your work, for your faithful stewarding of your mind, and the resources you provided for us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yep, we'll do it again. Guys, head on over to iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, give the show rating and review. Did you know Hitler was a vegan? Probably a cat lady. You need to send this episode to someone who doesn't know history, who thinks that somehow Hitler has more in common with Trump or something stupid. I don't know. Send this to a friend, and then subscribe at Rumble, because the Google overlords have removed this show from YouTube before. And make sure that you go to thewhiterose.life to become an ally of the White Rose Resistance and support us as we're mobilizing the local church around America to get engaged against these evils in their communities. Until next time, I'm Seth Gruber, and this is The Seth Gruber Show.